We're in the 26th chapter of the book of Acts. We're studying about Paul's tribulations. Paul has been arrested for nothing. He didn't do anything. They wanted him dead. I know what it feels like to have a contract out on my head. I've had that several times and been close to assassination many times. And I know how Paul feels. It's not comfortable. I can have a lot less excitement in my life. I would like that a whole lot. Had too much sometimes. Well, Paul had too much excitement. He had been killed, remember? He was stoned to death. And then God raised him from the dead. He was, how many times was he beaten half to death? The man was stoned, beaten. They just nearly strangled him to death one time. His life was in jeopardy all the time. And for doing what? Paul, in the 13th chapter of the book of Romans, I want to read that for just a moment, because this very much is part of what's happening here. I'll read this in the beginning of every one of my classes on the presidents. The presidents and how they affected the world and the United States and society also. The presidents of America are very powerful in the world. Let every person be loyally subject to the governing authorities, the high powers. For there is no authority except from God, by his permission, his sanction. And those that exist do by God's appointment. Therefore, he who resists and sets himself against the authorities resists what God has appointed and arranged in divine order. Now, if you look up here on this deal, we have human government established there, don't we? The basis for human government is what? To protect the innocent from the perpetrators and to protect the people from the government. Now, a government is not valid otherwise, is it? God established the rules for human government, okay? He established it. And if it does not protect you from anarchy, that's exactly what we're talking about, anarchy here. We're talking about criminals. And when you make everything upside down, right is wrong and wrong is right, something's wrong. Any fool ought to be able to see that. For the civil authorities are not under terror to people of good conduct, but of those of bad behavior. Would you have no dread of him who is an authority? Then do what is right, and you will receive his approval and commendation. For it is God's servant for you to good. But if you do wrong, you should dread him at all, this government, leaders, and be afraid. For he does not bear and wear the sword for nothing. He is God's servant to execute his wrath and vengeance and punishment upon the evildoer and the wrongdoer, the perpetrator. Therefore, one must be in subjection, not only to avoid God's wrath, to escape punishment, but also as a matter of principle for the sake of your conscience. For this same reason you pay taxes, for the civil authorities are official servants under God and devoting themselves to attending his very service. Render all things unto, like Jesus said, render unto God that which is unto God, that which belongs to God, and unto Caesar that which is Caesar's. It says there, do you want to live in anarchy? Do you want to live in anarchy? Do you want to cancel the police department and the sheriff's department? Insanity, okay? Now, has this ever happened before in history? Nothing new under the sun, is there? Nothing new under the sun. Now, let's go back and look at the people that Paul is before now. Paul has an audience. And the people that Paul is for is Festus. By the way, that means we get a word festivity from Festus, okay? Happy, whatever. And Agrippa. What does Agrippa mean, Marilyn? You remember what Agrippa means? Agrippa.
Agrippa?
Yeah, what does his name mean? You remember?
I wrote it down.
It comes from agria and hippos. Agria means of the field or of the prairie, and hippos means horse. In other words, a wild horse. That's what Agrippa means, a wild horse. A Mustang, a wild horse. Now, you remember that?
I probably didn't hear you. What?
Wild horse.
Wild horse.
Wild horse.
Okay.
Yeah, wild horse. Now, so we have him, and then we have Bernice. Bernice is in Hebrew, her main name needs to increase, but in Hebrew the name Joseph is, or Josephine, is like Bernice. Berenice, okay? And it means to increase. Now, we have Festus here, and then we have Agrippa and Bernice. Now, Agrippa, they're all descendants of Herod the Great, okay? And they're married in and out of Jewish, there's a little bit of Jewish blood in these, not much, but some. And Paul talks to Agrippa, and he tells him, I'm glad that I'm before you because you know the rules of our country. Now, Agrippa, his name was actually Marcus Julius Agrippa. Marcus Julius Agrippa. He lived between 27 AD and about 100 AD. He is the son of Marcus Agrippa. He's Agrippa II. Now, his sister is Bernice. This is his full sister. They have the same mother, same father. And they have been, you'll find out that Bernice and Agrippa have an on and off love affair all over, just forever. She'll marry a man. She got married when she was 13 the first time. And to Marcus Julius Alexander. Then she got married to Herod Cilicia, and she had 2 sons by him, and then she ran off and left him. And then she married, and she was, all the time she would be with Herod. They'd have a love affair, and then she'd go marry somebody. Evidently, she was a very beautiful woman, according to some of the statues they have of her and everything. She was very beautiful, very seductive. And she married this Herod Cilicia, and then she married Polymon for one reason, to try to ward off rumors that she was living with her brother. And so she went and married Polymon, and then she left him, went back to Herod Agrippa again. She likes her brother. She's in love with her brother. And anyway, she does have an affair with Titus, Caesar. And he flips out over, and she's, I think, 10 years older than him. And I mean, she just wrangles him real good for quite a while, and he goes back to Rome, and they go back there, and it says, either the throne or her. This is too much like Cleopatra. They call her Little Cleo. Little Cleopatra. Because you know what Cleopatra did. You know, she was seducing somebody all the time. So she was known as Little Cleopatra. And she ends up just going out of history after Titus, and she goes back to Agrippa II. And anyway, right now, right in the middle of all of her love affairs, she comes before Paul. This is right, and she's in the prime of her life, and all of this, and she's crazy in love with Agrippa the second. And now Paul comes before them, and the first time he talks about what truth is, what justice is, and what morality is. And we know that they were they were almost persuaded, so to speak. And now they're going to come back again. The Jews are trying to get Festus to send Paul back to Rome to be tried there by the Sanhedrin. But are they really wanting to try him and back to Jerusalem, that is? They're going to send him back. They're going to kill him. They've hired people to kill him. There were 40 people that swore they wouldn't eat or drink at one time, and the Sanhedrin backed them. Now the Sanhedrin is right behind this. We're going to kill him. You go down there and you get him come back. They even sent a top-notch lawyer down there, remember, to try to talk him into sending him back to Jerusalem, so they're going to kill him on the way. Now, in the Hebrew, Brother Roger, it says, thou shalt not keep on murdering, doesn't it? Murder. It doesn't say killing. It says murdering. Now, what are they going to do to Paul? What do they plan on doing to Paul? They have planned on, they don't want to execute him. They want to murder him. He has done nothing amiss at all. And it says, thou shalt not keep on committing a perjury, doesn't it? That's while consecutive and perfect in Hebrew. It means that they continue to do this. Thou shalt not keep on murdering. Thou shalt not keep on committing perjury. And thou shalt not keep on lying. Now, these are the religious leaders of Israel that are doing this. And Paul is before them, and he just, he said, I haven't done anything. I haven't done anything against Roman law, and I haven't done anything against Jewish law. He said, I was a Pharisee of the Pharisees one time. He said, of the strictest sect of Israel. And they all know me. He said, I originally liked to kill Christians. And I did not like Jesus. We know that Paul was an officer of the court when they killed Stephen, when he was stoned. And Israel stepped out of line when they did that. They didn't have the right to do it. They couldn't kill anybody. They lost the right of capital punishment about the time that Jesus was born. Remember, it says, thou shalt not, a scepter shall not depart from Judah's knees until Shiloh comes. Messiah is born. And that's when they lost the right to execute criminals. So we have Agrippa. 26 and verse 1. Agrippos. And Agrippos means what? Comes from agria and hippos. Wild horse. He was different, wasn't he? De pros tom palon ephe epip trepspete si peri siaton legain tote ho palos ekaitenos tain kaira apologeto. And it says, moreover to Paul, or Agrippa to Paul, he said. Now, there's a lot of words here in the original language that are not used anyplace else in the Bible, and some places nowhere in ancient writings, or very few places. Now, he said here, that word he said there, that comes from theomai in Greek, which means to put words together, put a speech together. And he said in this little dialogue, it is permitted, it is allowed. It means that you can walk on, literally with words. It comes from epi and trepo. That means to walk on. He said, you can go ahead and walk on now with words. I want you to walk on. In other words, you are permitted to stand up and to speak on behalf of yourself. It's permitted. I permit it. And he said to speak. The word lagain there, that's infinitive also. You can continue to do this. And lagain, or lagain, that is, comes from lego. And lego means to pick out words. It has the idea of a chicken or a bird out in the yard picking up seed and putting down things. He picks up what he wants. He said, now I want you to pick up words, and I want you to put them in a line where we can understand. I want you to defend yourself. And the word davar in Hebrew is the same thing, doesn't it? Same word, davar. That means to speak and put words together. And then he said, and then Paul, he stretched out his hand. If you tied Paul's hands behind him, I don't think he could have talked. But he put his hand up like this. He stretched his hand out and he said, I'm going to say something now. I'm going to say something. Now, basically, the Jews, in some ways, had some what we might call characteristics that American Indians did. When you met an Indian on the road, they put their hands up like this, and they said, how cola? How cola? How means hi, and then cola means hello, my friend. And when he put his hands up like this, it means I'm not armed. I come unarmed. And Paul put his hand up. Of course, he wasn't armed, except with chains and manacles. And he stretched out his hand, and he kept on making an apology. This word here, apologeteo, it is imperfect in its middle voice. He kept on defending himself. He kept on making an apology. This is where we get the word apologetics, from this word right here. Then verse number 2. Peri ponton hon ek ka luomai hypo judeon basilio agrippa eg ge mia ematon makarion epi si melon semeron apologeste. He said, concerning all things of witches, literally, I am being accused. I keep on being accused. I'm accused of these things. I'm called out over this. You're calling me out. By the Jews. I'm being accused and I'm called out by the Jews. The word called out there, that's like my great-grandfather. Now, you watched the movie not Young Guns, but True Grit, where Rooster Cogburn character goes up to the cabin and he calls out there and he said, come out with your hands up. I'm Rooster Cogburn, U.S. Marshal. Well, that actually was taken from what my grandfather did. He said, come out with your hands up. This is Sam Paul, U.S. Marshal. Come out with your hands up. And then they said, just come on and get us. Now, in the movie, they started shooting back and forth, and he goes up there and puts, he has the woman or man or whatever, but it happened differently in different movies, but he had the little girl, Maddie Ross. By the way, Jim Ross, the names are even familiar with what really happened in my grandfather's life. Jim Ross was his deputy that ran off with his wife and then tried to get him murdered. But anyway, he called out in the real episode, he called out and he said, come out with your hands up, U.S. Marshal. Well, when they heard the name Sam Paul, they shuddered. They were afraid of him, just like the Rooster Cogburn character in the movie. He was a deterrent to crime. And he said, boys, that sounds like an invitation. You wait right here. And he walked square in that door. And he disarmed them. There were two of them, two men and a woman. And he walked in there and disarmed them, and they had a Hawken 58 caliber Hawken rifle in there. Of course, a 58 caliber Hawken rifle, you cannot take the bullets out of it, can you? It's black powder rifle, percussion. You have to go out there and shoot it. So he said, Jim, he said, get this and go out there and shoot it. Knocked a big hole in a pecan tree in the yard. Then he began to interrogate them. Now, Paul here is he said he's being accused of all these things. My grandfather didn't go arrest somebody that he did not have evidence that he was going to bring against them. He didn't go arresting people that were innocent. That was not his deal. There had been evidence on that trail with this Stuttgart gang and Smith gang here that was for months. They had leads to this when he went up there. And one of the ways that he would interrogate them, and I think Paul was even interrogated worse than this, because he was killed and beaten and everything else, but my grandfather would take barbed wire and put it around a man's neck and throw it up over a tree and put a stump down there and start walking around pouring kerosene on the ground. And they said, now, you can tell me what's going on here, and we'll stop this right now, and I'll just take you down there to Fort Smith, Arkansas, and old Judge Parker will send you down there to the Detroit House of Corrections and straighten your life out. Or we can light this fire, and I'll kick that stump out from underneath you. One of them said one time, why are you putting barbed wire around my neck? He said, because a rope burns. You know, this is really aggressive interrogation. Well, Paul was going through some bad things also. And he was innocent. He was innocent. He said, concerning all the things of which I am being accused by the Jews. And then he said, Basilia Agripta. Basilia Agripta. The word there means King Agrippa. Now, King Agrippa was the last Jewish king, or the king of the Jews. He was really only part Jew. And he was appointing the high priest. This man was the one that appointed, he took down high priest and he appointed high priest. So this is a powerful man. And he said, King Agrippa. He called him king because he was the king. He was the last of the Herodian line. Then he said, I have been caused to consider. I have been caused. This is a perfect and indicative passive. I've been caused to consider myself happy. Makaria. Happy means smiling, giggling. I'm happy. This is wonderful. Because I know you. And you know these people. Epi, that means upon or before you. That I'm being about is what it means there, melon. That's present participle, that's a continued thing. He said, I'm about to defend myself. And then verse number 3, malista, no stain, onta, si, ponton, ton, kata, judeos, ethon, te, kai, zete, maton, dio, diomai, macrothemas, acuse mu. He said, most of all, you guys know better. You guys know better. You know what's going on here. You're not in the dark about this. You may be in the dark of who I really am, and you wanted to hear me, but you're not in the dark about the Jewish people. He said, since you appointed the high priest, and the last high priest that came after Paul was Ishmael, and that high priest had been appointed by Agrippa. Okay? So you know very well what's going on behind my back. Of all the ones among the Jews, and then it says ethon, the ethnic habits of the Jews. I've heard this in the past, and this isn't anti-Semitic thing at all. But one of the customs of the Jews is bawling and squalling. They're always bawling about something, always crying about something, and always complaining about something. That's one of their customs. They're always bawling, squalling, and complaining. And he said, I was like that too. Agrippa, I was like that one time. I went about trying to destroy the people of the way, or of the Christians. Then we have here the little word te kai. Te is a cumulative enclitic particle. That means both and also. And then it says zealous questions. Zeto maton. Zealous questions, wherefore I beg you to be very patient of what you're about to hear from me. Agrippa II had broken many Jewish laws, and the Jews complained about him. He was living in incest, and Luke does not explain all of this to you, but we know in history what happened, and what happened here. Verse number 4. Tain me un biosin mu ek neotetos te apa akres arches genomene en to ethne mu en te Jerusalemois isasi pontus Judeoi. For indeed, what manner of life? The word there is, we get a word biology from this word biosin. What manner of living that I had from my very young age, neotetos, from the very beginning of my life, having become a member of this nation, my nation, both in Jerusalem, and all the Jews knew about me. Verse number 5. Progenos contes me anothen iaton tholosi maturain hote kata tain akri base tatain harasen tes hamerteras thes case as they saw Pharisees. And I want you to know beforehand, I want you to know beforehand, from the very beginning, this word anothen, that's a little adverb of time and place. If these people might be willing to testify that according to the most exact disciplined life and sect, that word akri base tatin, our word acrobat comes from that. Now, acrobats are very well trained, aren't they? Their life depends on it in all reality. I remember a long time ago I went to the circus on Union Avenue, actually on Chester Avenue, out there just before you cross over the bridge in Oildale. And I saw these acrobats up there in the flying trapeze and catching each other, and there wasn't a net down below. These people had to be absolutely very well trained and in perfect discipline and in perfect timing, or they were dead. And that's where the word comes from right there. Akri base tatain, that I had an absolutely disciplined religious regimen of a life. And I was of the most strictest sect of our religion. And I lived as a Pharisee. Now the word Pharisee comes from the word what? Perez in Greek. Isn't that right, Brother Roger? Set apart. Yeah, set apart. The Bible says in the date of Perez, the earth was divided. The earth, it means divided. So this is a set-apart sect of people. And then here we go to our last verse, and we're going to go back and read this in the Amplified. Kai nin ep elpida, tes eis tus, panteras himon, epongalias, genomenes, hippo tu theo, este ka krinomenos. Let's go ahead and read number 7. Eis hain to didokela phalon, himon an ektene, nicta kai hemera, latrion elpize, karatante sa, peri heis elpidas, ekalumai, hippo Judea basiliu. And it says, and now here, my whole life is based upon the hope that was based upon the fathers and the patriarchs, the fathers, the hope. And then it says, and the promise, the Pongalia, the upon message, having been made by the God, I stand being judged, to which the 12 tribes of us, in all earnestness, night and day, worshiping to arrive in this hope, concerning which hope I am now accused by the Jews, O King. He said, everything I'm telling to you is a part of the hope of all Israel. And the hope of all Israel was what? That someday there would be a resurrection, and someday there would be a judgment, and they wished to be judged according to their deeds. Now, according to Jewish people, the Gentiles are not going to be resurrected. Did you know that? There's no hope for the Gentiles. They're not even going to be resurrected. They're just going to lay there in a grave like a dog or a cat or something, they say. But the Jews look for a resurrection. The oldest place in the Bible we talk about the resurrection is all the way back in the book of Genesis. And then in the book of Job, which is even older than the book of Genesis. Job talked about the resurrection from the dead, didn't he? He said, one of these days I know that I shall stand upon my feet, and not another, but I will stand upon my own feet, looking through my own eyes, and seeing the judge of all life. Now let's go back and read this in the Amplified Bible. Then Agrippa said to Paul, you are permitted to speak on your own behalf. And at that Paul stretched forth his hand and made his defense as follows. I consider myself fortunate, King Agrippa, that it is before you that I am able to make my defense this day in regard to all the charges brought against me by the Jews. And it's actually his fellow Jews, his family, his fatherland, so to speak. The word patriarch or fathers is fatherland. Especially because you are fully and unusually conversant with all the Jewish customs. He was the one that appointed the high priest, remember? And all the controversies, therefore, I beg you to hear me patiently. Be long-minded now. My behavior and manner of living from my youth up to is known by all the Jews. And they are aware that from the commencement of my youth was spent among my own race in Jerusalem. Now, Paul was born where? In Tarsus, in Asia Minor pretty much, Turkey, whatever you want to call it. And as soon as he got old enough to actually learn, 4, 5, 6 years old, when he reached the age of the tripping gate is what they called it, he went to the pedagogue, and where he went was Jerusalem, and he learned under what teacher? Gamaliel, the greatest of all the Jewish teachers. the man that made his people fall in love with the law. They fell in love with the law by this man. He said Gamaliel was my teacher. And they have full knowledge of me for a long time. If they are willing to testify to it, that in accordance with the strictest ancient sect of our own religion, I lived as a Pharisee. The Pharisees thought they were better than everybody else, didn't they, Paul? Roger.
Yeah.
They did. Paul looked upon himself as better than every other Jew because he was a Pharisee. And he was a Pharisee of Pharisees and a Hebrew of Hebrews. And what does that mean? You remember what I've told you in the past about a Hebrew of Hebrews? He spoke real Hebrew in his home. Most of the Hebrews did not speak biblical Hebrew because they thought it was profane to do that. It was blasphemy to speak in the Bible language, so they spoke in Aramaic. But Paul and Paul's home, they spoke Hebrew, biblical Hebrew. And he said, I was a Pharisee of Pharisees. What does that mean? He was the strictest order of Pharisees. Not just a Pharisee, but of the highest, the Pharisee of Pharisees. He was a zealot. A zealot. And now, I stand here on trial to be judged on the ground of the hope of the promise made to our forefathers by God. What was that hope? That there would be a resurrection and that Israel would be one day the administrator of God's kingdom again in the millennium for 1,000 years, that they would lead the world in worship of God. And that basically is going to be in the resurrection, after the resurrection of the churches, and Israel will be resurrected as a what we call a righteous nation, and they're going to have to go through that 7 years of tribulation to make them ready for it. Verse number 7 now. And now I stand before you on trial, to be judged on the ground of the hope of that promise made to our forefathers by God, which hope of Messiah and the resurrection, and of the 12 tribes confidently expect to realize as they fervently worship without ceasing night and day. And for that hope, O King, I've been accused by the Jews and considered a criminal. What a story, isn't it? What a story. A beautiful story. If could you be arrested for being a Christian today and prosecuted? Could you be arrested today as a Christian, and could they have enough evidence to prosecute you? Paul the Apostle was arrested because he was a Christian. And not that he did anything wrong. But all he did was preach the fulfillment of the Old Testament law and the New Testament promise, Jesus Christ and him crucified. 1 Corinthians, the 13th chapter, he tells you there. Let's look at that for just a moment. 1 Corinthians, the 13th chapter. The 15th chapter. Moreover, brethren, I declare unto you the gospel, which I preached unto you, and which you also have received, and wherein you stand. The gospel. What is the gospel? The same thing that Paul was talking to Agrippa and Bernice and Felix. By which also ye are saved, if you keep in memory that which I preached unto you, unless you have believed in vain, unless you come on for the ride for a while and went off. For I delivered unto you first of all that which I also received, how that Christ died for our sins according to what? The Scriptures. Not just happenstance, but according to the Scriptures. And that he was buried, and that he rose again the third day according to the Scriptures. And that he was seen of Cephas, then of the 12. And after that he was seen of over 500 brethren at once, of whom the greater part of these are still alive unto the present, but some have fallen asleep. And after that, He was seen of James, and then of all the apostles, and last of all, he was seen of me, as of one aborted as an abortion. Paul was on his way to hell until God stopped him on the road to Damascus. And he fell on his face because of the bright light, and that bright light was what? Jesus. And Jesus said to him, Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me? And he said to him, who are you, Lord? He said, Jesus, whom you persecute. And then he said, what would you have me to do? Today, can you say, what would you have me to do? What would you have me to do? What are you supposed to do? Serve the Lord, study His Word, get to know Him better. This is our instruction manual here. Instruction manual.